This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. We have news about Donald Trump, the former president, now requesting a federal judge to hand over to his legal team an unredacted version of the affidavit for the search of his Mar-a-Lago estate. And this is where we start today with our political panel. Kristen Hawn is back with us today, partner at ROKK Solutions, and Brendan Buck, partner at 7 Letter, former counselor to House Speaker Paul Ryan. It's great to have both of you here. Brendan, I'll start with you as the Republican in this case. Donald Trump is running for president. He's an official candidate. Do stories like these help to reinforce his base who see him as a victim?
Yeah, it's not actually surprising to me that he's leaning into this. The Mar-a-Lago raid the first time actually had an effect of everybody rallying around him. I mean, remember, Republicans have been going after the DOJ and the FBI for years now and painting the picture that this is part of the deep state and they're out to get him. And that's where he gets a lot of his power, is he says, I'm fighting for you. There are elite people in Washington who want to stop me, and so they're coming after me. So it doesn't surprise me that he's leaning in. I don't think it's particularly good that he's got legal trouble for a general election, but he's going to try to make most of the situation he's got right now. So
this is why the special counsel, Kristen, so they cannot accuse Joe Biden of thumbing the scale. But does anyone believe that?
I mean, I think they still will.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about it from a political perspective, you know, the Republicans were, you know, like Brendan said, as I've been going after DOJ and the FBI for years, with the exception of when, you know, with the Hillary Clinton email stuff, they seem to be fine with that. But, you know, from a political perspective, you know, as far as long-term goes, I mean, I'm saying, and I won't pretend to speak for my Republican friends, but you know, I don't think it's a good long-term strategy for Trump. People want to look forward, and I think that you're seeing a lot of shift to people like Ron DeSantis. They see as a new kind of hope for the future.
I've asked a lot of people this, the perfect storm that you can already see on the horizon. 2 cases under the new special counsel, Fulton County, Georgia, Southern District of New York. Brendan, what if all of these resolve around the same time during an active presidential campaign?
Well, it's really hard to predict how they will resolve. Obviously, we built up the Mueller investigation for a very long time, thinking that was going to be the moment that kind of took him down, if you will, and it didn't materialize. And I think it strengthened him in some ways. So it's not helpful to have all of this swirling around him. Look, I guess it would probably depend if we're talking about in a Republican primary. Can he play the victim? So much of Donald Trump's persona is that he is the victim. He has these grievances, and he plays that role really well. But if you get to a general election and your nominee is potentially going to be indicted, I think people are ready to move on from. I think they're tiring of it a little bit, and I think you're seeing that both with Republican primary voters. I don't know if it's enough to stop him. I still think he's the front runner. But certainly, I believe one of the big reasons that he lost to Joe Biden was people were just kind of over it. And if this stuff is still swirling around him, I think that's bad news for him in a general election.
Well, there are a lot of concerns about him being back on Twitter. Maybe there's another January 6th in the offing. People can react, obviously, very strongly to some of these headlines. Kristen, when does Joe Biden need to announce his decision?
Well, the president's certainly not working on Donald Trump's timeline, so I think, you know, he'll take his time, make a decision going forward, so yet to be seen.
Do you try to make this last as long as you can, though, if you're Joe Biden? Or do you say, no, I'm 80 years old and I am running? He's got doubters out there in his own party.
I think, again, you know, he's not working on anybody else's timeline. I think that, you know, it would behoove him to do something, you know, send a message to the party sooner rather than later.
When I think about the potential Republican presidential candidates who spoke over the weekend, Brendan, at the conference that brought Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Chris Sununu, the question is, will Donald Trump clear the field? If they're still talking like prospective candidates at RJC or whatever conservative confab is happening, doesn't that tell us that he has not cleared the field?
I'm not quite ready to say that yet.
Okay.
I mean, to Kristen's point, it's really early that he's already announced he's running.
Yeah.
You know, I think when he first announced in 2015, it was like in June or something. So he's way ahead of schedule. And some of these people have a little bit of time. They can wait and see, what do the polls look like? Do they show him softening? Do they show him weak? Do they show an opening for them? But I think each of them need to make a pretty difficult decision. Is it worth challenging him? Is it worth presenting yourself as anti-Donald Trump? Because I don't think you can run against Donald Trump and just say you're okay with him. So I think somebody has to actually go at him. And that's a risky proposition for these people, especially some of these people who are 25, 30 years younger than him and have long futures ahead of him. Yeah. Even Ron DeSantis, who I think is obviously the person we talk most about, I think there's a really good case that he should wait 4 more years and let Donald Trump get through the system a little bit more, because there's no guarantee that you're going to beat him, and you could be pretty damaged after that. And there's certainly no guarantee that if you do beat him, In a general election, he's not going to try to undermine you, and you lose the general. So there's a lot to think about if you're them.
Fascinating conversation with Buck and Hawn, our political panel today, as we turn to some breaking